Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my video. So, as you guys know, who have probably been keeping up with the Crypto Cup finals, or well, knockout rounds, knockout portion, semifinals. It has been a very close encounter. It was nice to see this game here, and this is the round 4. Game 4 between Nepomniachtchi and Wesley. So, as always, for my people in the Philippines, magandang umaga, kamusta na, mabuhay to you guys. Masaya akong makinig muli. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Anybody who's coming from Russia who does speak Russian, a privyet to you. Spasibo for checking my stuff out. Appreciate it very much. If you guys are ready to go, let's take a look, see what we got for the game. All right, so we got knight to f3. Run through these moves real quick. We got d5, g3. Knight comes to f6. We got bishop to g2, e6, castles, bishop to e7. We got d3, castles by black. Knight b to d2, c5, and then we have e4. Now, this is technically not an opening. It is a system. What white is doing is similar to what black would do. Pretty much given the same opportunity. They're basically opting for a setup. A lot of times you might see like, a b3, bishop to b2 come and just like do the full, double side fianchetto. But basically it doesn't really matter what black plays. White adopts like this exact structure right here with pretty much like this entire situation here. They got the pawn at d3, pawn at d4, knight b to d2, knight f3, fianchetto in the bishop, and so this is called the King's Indian attack. And it would be the same thing for black if it's called the King's Indian defense. Like I said, it's just a setup, so it doesn't really too much matter what black plays. White pretty much plays the same thing, unless black is being like crazy aggressive and you can't successfully set this up. So it just depends on the situation. But we do see knight to c6. And as you guys can see though, black does have a lot of space. They do have this nice pawn center going on. So, they've been able to get that pawn ahead of their knight. So that's good to go. So we see rook to e1. We got b5. e5 comes. Knight to d7. Knight back to f1. Trying to, open up this bishop here on this diagonal. We got a5, h4. We have b4. And as you can see, black, it's still fairly even. Black definitely does have a little bit of an advantage. And it's mostly because they just have such a gigantic amount of space. But I'm going to get to that more specifically in a second. So we got bishop to f4. We have a4. We got a3. Now, in this particular position, it's actually best for black to hold the tension. So queen can come to a5. You can also see knight to b6. Just basically maintaining the tension down here. I mean, of course, white doesn't want to capture because you're going to be looking at capturing like this. And you're going to be making a pass pawn and basically making this rook live on this square forever. So we're never not going to see that. But after, queen comes to a5, we're just basically maintaining our space advantage. If you guys can see, right now, black pretty much has control, over all of these squares in white's half of the board. So we definitely want to maintain that. But what we do see in the game is pawn takes a3, and then we see pawn takes a3. And just to show you guys a little bit of a difference, black is now controlling just slightly less. So one of the main concepts of chess is space. It's a little bit hard sometimes to calculate. It's a little bit hard to understand space because it kind of almost seems like it doesn't exist. But generally, when you have more space, your pieces have more movability. And especially when you can get into an endgame, you have a situation where you can just basically move your king more freely and your pieces. So definitely don't sleep on space. Do some research on space. Do a little bit of reading, a little bit of study, because sometimes space can definitely do you some good. But we do see rook coming to b8. We got knight to e3. We have bishop to b7. And bishop to b7 is actually the novelty of the game. Now, it may just a touch more sense to go bishop to a6 because we do have this rook on this nice open file. So bishop to b7, not only does it kind of bite on a pawn, but it does just kind of slice through the position just a little bit better on this diagonal. So it's a slightly better diagonal to be on. But bishop to b7 is definitely not bad. We got c4, knight comes to b6. We got pawn takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes a4. We got knight to c3, giving a nice little attack on the queen, making it uncomfortable. So white does have a passed pawn, but it's not for very long. So the queen comes to c4. We see queen to a5, trying to make sure that we, blockade this pawn. We got rook a to c1. So we're abandoning the pawn, but we are trying to double attack this knight, which of course has to be dealt with. We see knight back to b5. We have knight to c2. Knight takes a3, knight takes a3, queen takes a3, and then we have bishop to g5. Now, bishop to g5 is wanting two separate things. The first thing is to deflect this bishop away from this diagonal so that you just straight up win the pawn. But then also a little bit of a deeper wish for it is to, for the bishop to take here. We got the knight taken. Maybe the rook moves or does something like that. And then we are able to pop the knight down on e4. Double attack this, triple attack this pawn, but then also we're really wanting to get this knight into d6. Now, the thing about it is this was a dark square bishop, so for the moment, the dark squares are pretty much taken care of by that bishop, so eliminating it would allow our knight to more freely move on the dark squares. But we did not see that. We had bishop to g5, the rook came f to d8, and then we saw bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, so we were able to get the pawn. Queen took on c5, and we have to take back with the queen because we are attacking this knight here. So we had to trade there. So the rook took on c5. We got bishop taking f3, knight taking f3, rook taking d3, bishop to e4, giving a counter attack on this knight. We have rook to c7, or rook to d7, sorry. We got h5, g6, king comes to g2. So we're starting to try to make a little bit of progress here for white. So at this point in time, it's pretty much dead even. It's pretty locked. So neither side really just kind of has an advantage over the other. And it's getting into a typical type of an endgame, but there can possibly be some life. It just depends on how each player plays the game. So we got king to g7, we got rook to h1, we have knight back to g8. So it kind of looks like, why would you put it way back on its starting square? But coming up, we got rook h to c1, doubling up on the c file. We have pawn takes h5. We got rook back to h1, rook to b4, giving a nice little counter attack on the bishop. Now, it is possible just to disregard the bishop and take on h5. And then after the rook takes, you just slide that check in on g5. The king would, do something. I mean, it possibly either come down, do something like this, and that would be rook check there. You'd be winning the knight back. So that was a possibility. It pretty much just keeps things even. But we did see bishop to c2. We got king to h6. We have bishop down to d1, giving a nice little double attack on that pawn. We have h4. Something had to give. There wasn't really a way to defend it. We got bishop to e2. And knight comes to e7. And this is very instructive, I think, because this is something as black that you need to think about. Let me go ahead and just... okay, I won't do that. Okay, this is something you think about. Something you guys hear me say all the time is when you have a weakness in your position, trying to figure out a way to get rid of the position. Now, it's still a similar situation when you have a underused or non-used or bad piece. So when you're thinking as black, you have your rooks on open files, your king is pretty active over here, whatever. But what is one piece that's not really doing much or can definitely be improved? And that is the knight. So that makes knight to e7 the perfect move given the scenario. So whenever you're playing your own games, look at your position. It's not only about just trying to attack and defend and stuff like that, but just think what is in my position that's bad? Where do I have any weaknesses? Try to either defend the weaknesses or get rid of the weaknesses or just improve pieces. That's something that's really important too. So getting on, we have rook takes h4, rook takes h4, we got pawn takes h4, and we got knight to g6. And as you can see, this knight is starting to influence the game. It's starting to kind of, jump in and have a little bit of fun. So we got the king to g3, rook comes to d4, and then we see rook to c4. And I'm going to show you what was actually played in the game, and that is rook takes c4. But if we back up to this position, I want you guys to go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find what was a really nice, alternate move for black in this position. Go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So the thing that I think is, I don't think this is the easiest move to find in the position. I think that rook takes, of course, rook takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight takes e5. That's pretty much automatic. And this is actually the strongest way to play. But something that was not quite as strong, but was still like a nice little idea. It's a nice little tactical combination. after rook to c4 was actually knight takes h4. Now, for the moment, h4 is still defended by the rook. And if you were to take back with this rook here, you would be coming into a fork on f5. King would probably come down, something like that. And then you would be taking on d4 with the knight. So as you can see, it's slightly similar, but just a little bit of a different position. The difference between the two is that you have basically what you want to try to focus on when you're trying to take material is the center pawn. So, I mean, you're thinking in the opening, in the middle game, I mean, the most important part of the board is the center, right? And that is true as far as pawns are concerned, too. If you could snap off a central pawn, they're a little bit worth a little bit more than a wing pawn, especially because, you know, you have this isolated pawn and stuff like that. So if we go back to what we had in the game, we saw rook took c4 and then knight takes e4. So what you've given yourself is the ability to possibly create a passed pawn with this 2-on-1 type of majority in the center. So that's what you want to kind of be thinking about a little bit more, because, you know, there's a lot of situations where you can draw with a rook pawn. So, you know, getting forward, we see bishop to b3, and I'll run through these moves real quick. So we got king to g7, we got f4, knight comes to c6, we got bishop to c2. So this is a lot of maneuvering and basically trying to like make my minor piece better than your minor piece type situation, and all about trying to kind of restrict the kings and try to make sure that, you know, there's not as much movability for your opponents. So we got h6, we got bishop to b1, we got knight to e7, we have king to g4, knight to d5. Backing up, f5 was definitely very much wished by the computer. It's just a way to knock the king back and basically making it possible for him to come up the board. But we did see knight to d5, which was one of the top moves as well. We have king to g3, we got king to f8, we got king to g4, we got knight to f6 with check, king comes down to f3, we have king to e7, bishop to c2, we got knight to h5, we see king to g4, knight back to g7. So as you can see, we are cutting off like white's king completely. It's not really able to make a lot of progress forward. So we got bishop down to b1. We have f6, bishop to a2. We got king to d6. So basically, as you guys will see coming up, like the king is trying to get into d4 and then it's trying to get into d3 as well. So we see king to f3. We got h5. We have king to g3. King comes to c5. We see bishop to b3. And this is actually the point in the game where it starts, the advantage for black starts to greatly increase. This is pretty much almost winning by this point. So we see king coming to d4, and we see king to f3, but then we are allowed to play king to d3 with no type of repercussions. If we back up, what Jan Nepomniachtchi really had to do after king to c5 is go king to g2, not move the bishop, go king to d4, and then after king comes to f3, after king comes to d3, you have this rook, this bishop to b1 with check, and this is going to knock the king away, and, you know, cause it to be in a less, you know, a less influential square than when we saw king coming to d3. There's not a way to knock this king off. So basically, this king can oppose this king like pretty much forever. So, you know, it's definitely going to live there. So we got bishop to a4, knight comes to f5, bishop to b5 with check. And you guys can see to check the king, it took an extra 2 moves. The king comes to d4. We got bishop to e8. Given what seems to be a counterattack on that pawn, but we see knight taking h4, king to g3, and then we're just in time with another check on f5. The king comes back to f3, and then we're just in time with knight to g7. So as you guys can see, this knight ended up being much better than this bishop. So we see bishop to f7. We have king to d5, bishop to g6. We got f5. Bishop comes to f7. We have king to d6. We have king to g3. We got king to e7, we have bishop to g6, we have king to f6, we have bishop to h7, and then we have knight to e8. And it is actually in this position that Jan Nepomniachtchi does resign the game. So congratulations, Wesley. So he won the first match of the 2 matches. So all he has to do tomorrow is just draw all of his games, and then he'll win the matches 1.5 to 1.5 to half. And then he'll make it on to the finals. So he'll either be playing Magnus Carlsen or Timur Rajabov. So basically, the reason why Jan Nepomniachtchi is resigning this game here is because of either he's going to be losing his bishop completely, or he's just going to get into a completely inferior endgame. So showing you those 2 differences. We have king coming to h4, the knight coming to c7, king taking h5, we have knight to d5, king down to h4, knight takes h4, and as you can see, you have 2 completely connected central pawns against no pawns, and it's not possible with this bishop to hold that scenario because you're just going to be basically, you know, using the knight and the king to just force these pawns down. And so at some point, the bishop is going to have to give itself up for one of those pawns. But it's not going to matter because you have another one to queen. So you're going to be good to go. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you want to have fun, just get a bishop and do the bishop and knight check versus the king. And so something else, if as black, if you did want to just trap the bishop and just make it more simple, you can just go king to g7 after. So after king to h4, you can just go king to g7. The bishop, the best thing the bishop can do is give itself up on f5 for the pawn. But as you guys see, after the pawn takes, I mean, the king would take on h5, the king would come down to f6, king to h4, king to g6. As you guys can see, you know, black is going to be able to win this pawn. It's going to be able to, you know, waste a move, you know, with the knight. And that's the thing about end games. When you have extra pieces compared to your opponent, you usually have the ability to have what we call reserve tempo. And that's just the ability to basically waste a move to make, you know, to basically put your opponent in zugzwang, you know, because when you oppose the king or when you get into a favorable square, you don't want to have to move, but, you know, wasting tempo helps you do that. So that's definitely another type of in-game concept to look up, reserve tempo. All of this stuff that I mentioned as far as chess concepts, for the most part, are pretty much on Wikipedia. If you ever want to just Wikipedia them, you know, the transpositions, you know, the square of the pawn, you know, the reserve tempo, all that different type of stuff, opposition, outflank, everything that I mentioned in my videos, you can look up on Wikipedia. So that is that game. It's really nice game. I think Jan Nepomniachtchi just kind of like fell asleep a little bit, or he got tired. They were mentioning maybe he was a little bit tired and stuff, but you know, he was I don't know, like he just kind of like overlooked some of this and just kind of played, you know, just kind of random and allowed, you know, Wesley So to kind of get his foot in the door a little bit. But as always, for my people in the Philippines, I've been working on these languages. I've been working on getting them in order. There's a certain order that I'm trying to do them in. So let me make my further attempt. So I have Maayon Buntag. I have Mayad na Agahan. Ninebag na Bigat. Masentos Yakabosan. Marhe na Aga. I think, yes. Buenos dias. Maayong Aga. I want to say Myriad na Uma. Is that it? Mapia na Uma. Okay, so I got Mapia na Uma for Ibanag. Kapian Kapa no Dios. And I'll be getting another one probably next video or something like that. So, I appreciate you guys stopping by very much. Spasibo to you, and I'll see y'all next time.